here, just quickly, you can see that, GT metrics measures, avoid load time on average is 6.9
Load
seconds.
time has been a very, very big factor when it comes to optimizing conversions as well.
Hello, I'm Michael Borgelt. He's Abdul.
I'm Abdul.
Yep. He's Abdul, and he's the Crazy Optimizer. Episode 7 today. I think 21. You do something for 21 times, it becomes a habit. So we're a quarter of the way there, or a third of the way there, I should say. And today we're going to talk a little bit about just the migration process. So not necessarily all about speed, but as you're, working on websites and doing different things, eventually you'll have to probably migrate them from one server to another, or from a staging environment to a production environment, whatever it may be. So today we're going to talk a little bit about what that process is, how that works, and the tools we use. So let's talk a little bit about just kind of the process that you use to migrate sites. So let's just start at the high level and go there, and I'll probably take some notes and ask you some additional questions from there.
Okay, thank you, Michael. So yep, I think migration is something like everyone using WordPress has to go through, because people are changing hosts, people are changing providers. So it's something that people have to do, and sometimes it's very scary as well when you have to do it. And if you don't especially if there's some complexity involved. But the good thing with WordPress is, because it's such a big ecosystem, there's some very good tools out there that you can use. Because before, I think a few years back, it used to be all very manual. You had to do it. You had to copy the files down. You then had to copy the databases. And now I think there are a lot of good tools that we use as well, because I think very recently we also underwent quite a big migration spell. We migrated over 300 websites from our old infrastructure to a new infrastructure. So I think in those 300 websites, we did test a lot of things before starting, and we've picked a tool that worked for us. So I think for us, the good thing is that now there are so many tools out there. Otherwise, it would have been very difficult for us to do the migration. But I think when it comes to migrating the website, the first thing that you have to know is if you have any complexities there. Because when you're working on the website, if it's a straightforward WordPress website, it's just a blog that you have, I don't think it's that tricky. But if it's an e-commerce website, it becomes tricky, because then you have, especially if it's a high traffic website, because we also get those a lot, right? We have some high traffic websites running there. So we have to make sure that we time the migration well, so they're not missing out any orders. Make sure that we do a database check to ensure that once the site is migrated and live on the new server, if any orders came in between that time, things like that. So these are, I think apart from the technical complexities, it's just making sure you know what you're doing, you've planned about it, that you have things in mind that what can go wrong, so you fix them all before you start. Because once you start, and if things go wrong, you might not have the chance to fix them. But I think with the good new tools that are out there, they do make it a lot easier. Not 100% error-free, but they do make it a lot easier for sites to be migrated.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned there's really two components, and correct me if I'm wrong. There's the database, and then all the files that need to come through. And that's really how WordPress runs, and that's how I used to transfer sites a long time ago. Is you had to grab both of them. You had to grab the database and download it, and then the files and download it, and then re-upload each as well. I think the other thing you mentioned that was kind of a good point is, hey, you should probably always back up things first, right? You should back up the WordPress site or whatever it may, the database, all of that stuff first before you start a migration, just in case you need to roll back. It's always good to have some version of the backup. So hopefully, as you're managing these sites, we have a process where we keep 90 days of backups for clients, but you always want to make sure you have that so you can roll back in case something happens. Okay, so you mentioned a number of tools. Gosh, I think mine was called Duplicator, the one that I used a long time ago, right? But I know that you're using a new tool, or a newer tool than that, or something that I think a lot of people use. But let's just talk a little bit about Migrate Guru and why you like it, and go from there. So
I think I told, because this is also owned by Akshat in Blog World. This is one of their products. So I think I did tell him when I was using that, and when we were doing our migrations from to a new infrastructure. So I did tell him that I really want to hug you, because you've made my life so much easier. Because this tool has, because the good thing about, like you mentioned, Duplicator. These are some still used, people still use it. But I think now with all the advancements that you have in technology and all the cloud-based things that happen, it doesn't make sense to like download stuff, because most of the old tools used to work like that, right? You used to download the database, they used to make a package, you used to download it, and then you used to upload it on the new host, you install WordPress or maybe and upload the installation package and then deploy it there. So it just makes it difficult. And especially if you don't have very good internet, or if it's an e-commerce website, then with high traffic, then you don't have the time as well to do all this, right? To have this kind of a download phase and then the upload phase. So now the good thing with Migrate Guru is that it's completely automated in the sense that you just install the plugin, and you install the plugin, you add the details to your new host. They do support a lot of hosts, like you can see from the banner images there, but they do have a lot others as well that they support direct migration to. But as we have our own custom infrastructure, we do the FTP one, the standard FTP migration from Migrate Guru, and that works very well. So I think I did tell Akshay that in the 300 migrations that I did, the failure rate was, I think we just had a couple of websites that had some issues that I had to do manually. So less than, like, I think even not even 1% in terms of failure rate. Now, this is a failure rate that you won't even get in manual. And so I think these guys have done a very good job when it comes to the migration part. Like, they have really hit the nail on this, and you just can do it. And 99% you won't have any issues. And also the issues do come in when there's some sort of a very custom kind of infrastructure in play, where the site that we are moving it from has something very customized about it, something which is not very standard. That's where some issues can come in. But otherwise, these guys have done a very good job, and like, I had no issues working with the tool, and we still use it to the day. And when we are migrating, like, I think we just migrated a bunch of websites yesterday as well. So I think without Migrate Guru, it wouldn't have been possible. So yeah, good big shout out to these guys. And I did ask him as well, like, why do you keep this tool free? Because the value it adds for an agency like us, like, it's amazing. But I think that's one of their tools, because this is the first tool we got used to, and then we went to their main blog wall tool as well, because we saw the infrastructure and saw how solid it is. So I think it's a good marketing tool for them as well.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's like their foot in the door offer, a free foot in the door offer. You can go use their tool, and then you like wonder more about their other services, right? Yeah. So now you've taken a copy of the site, right? So you've gone in, you've used Migrate Guru to manage the site. What are some of the next steps that you're doing through the migration process?
Okay, I think when it comes to migration, if the first step is to move the files in the database, right, to the new host. So you have your current hosting provider where you are, and you have your new hosting provider. So if your hosting provider doesn't give you migrations like we do, so if they don't give you migrations, then you have to do the migrations yourself. So you have a new WordPress installation on your new host. So now you need to move two things. You need to move the files in the database there, and then you need to change the DNS. So these are two vital steps that happen when it has to migration. So if you're using Migrate Guru, then it handles the first part, both the database and the files itself automatically. It will move them, and it's pretty fast as well. Like, I think I have moved websites, normal websites that are like under a GB, they do get moved in under an hour. And we've even moved websites up to like 30, 40 GBs, 50 GBs with them. They do take time, but it's very solid, and they get moved with full file integrity as well. So once that's done, then the two options, like, because initially when we used to use Migrate Guru, I used to like use my host file. Many developers would know that, like, you change the IP address on your system. So you're locally, so you are looking at the new server while you don't change the DNS. But I think with the stability that I've seen, I don't do that anymore. I just know that the files are there. I just do a quick check in the folder and check if all the files are there. If I don't see any big issues in the files, and I see all the folders created, and the database created as well. You can easily match the database on both hosts. If they look fine, it's more of a visual check. If I just do a visual check, if they look fine, I just do it because I know the tool is stable. But before that, I think in the first 50 migrations that we did with this tool, I did used to do the host changes and make sure that I'm looking at the website first and then doing the DNS changes. But nowadays, I just don't do it because I know that's working.
Cool.
So then you have to change the DNS.
Yeah. So then we're to the point to the DNS, and Abdul's mentioned about changing your host. There's a way that you can go into your site or onto your computer, change the IP that when you load a URL, it looks at a different IP than it does the one that's publicly available publicly. You just go in and, depending on your system, change your host files, they're called. So the other thing is, talk quickly about, you do the visual check, and, obviously we always kind of want FTP to talk about like those other files that may not be in the normal structure of WordPress. When do you grab those? Are you doing that before you change the DNS, or are you doing that after?
See, I normally do it like if there are not a lot of files, I do it after the DNS. If it's not in a hurry, I do it after the DNS. But most of the times, I do it before the DNS changes. So it depends, because if I'm working on an e-commerce website and I have a very short window, I do try to make sure that I have the DNS change, because then I don't want the database and things like that. But if it's a normal website, then I can do it after the DNS change as well. But normally, I think if we migrate 100 websites, I think only 5 or so have these files, because most of the people do use WordPress's own media library, and they have all the files in WP content. But some people, for some reason, some developers do keep some static files apart out of WordPress. So that is one thing that I do a check on, to make sure all the files that if there are any other folders out there, any other things, they get moved.
Cool. So now we've moved all the files. We have them sitting there. Now we're working on the DNS. So let's talk a little bit about the DNS process and what the tools we use. And, obviously we got to go to got a domain login information to make this adjustment and change either the name server or the DNS records themselves. So talk a little bit about that process.
I think then the DNS process, it depends on your host, because some hosts, like if you're especially on a shared hosting environment, if you are working on a shared hosting environment, they do give you name servers. But if you are working in more of a managed hosting environment, or if you're working on a newer type of host, they normally just give you an A record to change, and they don't give DNS hosting. So then you have your DNS either hosted with your registrar like GoDaddy, Namecheap, or you can have some premium registrars like DNS Made Easy, or like Route 53, like from Amazon. So if either you go towards a premium route, or you host them on your registrar, or you change the name servers and bring the host directly, the DNS hosting to your host. But it depends a lot on your host. Like for us, we do both, because some of the clients don't want to change name servers. So we just change the A record IPs. And some people who are okay with changing, some clients who are okay with changing their DNS, we change the name servers and bring the whole record management to our end. So it depends a lot on your host. So if they give you an A record, then you need to have a DNS hosting provider. Normally, all major DNS domain registrars do have DNS hosting. So you can just change the A record. That's the record. That's the main record. If you change the host A record and the www CNAME or A record, then your website will start moving, going to the new. But there's one more thing to check here, because that's one process that we have, is emails, because that is where many things go tricky, especially if you're not using like G Suite or Zoho or any like Outlook email, anything external, which we tell everyone that they should like hosting email on your server is not a good idea. And that's when it's a best practice that most hosts these days, every big host follows. Apart from shared hosting providers, no other host nowadays gives email hosting on the server. They want you to host your email address elsewhere. So you have G Suite there, Google G Suite, then you have Rackspace, you have a lot of, you have Microsoft Outlook Business. So you have a lot of providers that we recommend as well to our clients to use. So if you have them, then it's not a worry. You just have to make sure that these records are transferred to, if you're changing name servers, you need to make sure that these records are there on the new DNS host. But if you're managing the DNS yourself at, let's say, GoDaddy or your own DNS hosting account, then the records are already there, so they don't get affected. But if you have email on your server, then that is because then you have to make sure that you migrate the emails as well. Mm-hmm. Because otherwise, once you change the DNS, emails can get tricky.
Yeah, they can.
So no one should have email on the server. Like I would say that again.
I mean, the reason we smile is because, email is probably the least fun thing to deal with. It's it's just not a lot of fun to handle and manage. So once you change the DNS, obviously we're at a tool like this that it will ping different locations to see after you make a change, we're waiting for the registrars to push out the DNS information to the new locations. And sometimes, like with Google, very quick. This happens within 5 minutes almost, you know, pretty quickly. But if you use somebody like Network Solutions or somebody, even Namecheap, I think is pretty slow, right? It could be a couple hours that, I mean, everyone's standard answer is 24 to 48 hours. That's really not the case anymore. That was probably 5 or 10 years ago. It is usually with under 30 minutes that all your DNS is updated. And that's kind of this process as you just type in a URL, it'll return the IP, and you can kind of see IPs changing from your old IP to your new IP through the process.
One thing that I do is, like, especially if people are not, because if you're used to, if you're a developer or if you're someone who's used to technology, you're very used to using the Chrome DevTools or Firefox DevTools. So when you're going through a website, you can make sure, because both of the websites are the same. So we have had some clients run into issues where they think they are working on the new site, but they are actually working on the old site, right? So because if you go to DevTools and if you go to network, you can see exactly which IP address you are going, which IP address your browser is loading, and if it's the new IP address. But now what we do is, whenever we migrate a website, once the migration process ends and we've moved all the files, before changing the DNS, we put up a big red notice there, so that the site is being migrated. So there are two purposes for that. One is to make sure that the client knows not to make any changes, because now the files have ended. So we won't be bringing over the files now. So any changes made after that point don't get reflected in the new site. And another is for me as well. So I don't have to go through this process, because if I log into a website and I see that red notice, I know that for me the DNS hasn't changed. I don't have to go and ping and things like that for me. So that helps me, like, makes my process faster as well. So I just see that notice and I know that I have to flush my cache, or I have to purge my cache, or I have to do something on my end, because I'm still going to the old server.
Yeah, and I think, I was just going to say quickly, we had a client that, you know, the DNS was completely updated. They kept loading the site, and this is why we created the plugin to do this, right? It actually was the router that was caching the IP, right? That it was actually causing them to consistently go to the old website instead of the new one. So,
yeah, and I think like the point you mentioned on updating DNS records, like 24 to 48 hours. I think, like you rightly mentioned, like Google and GoDaddy, I think in terms of, if you don't have a premium DNS provider like Amazon or DNS Made Easy, these guys are fast. Yes, you pay to them to be fast. But if you even have like Google Domains or GoDaddy, I think they're very fast. Like I literally just change the records and I come back and it's done. It's that fast in most cases. But yeah, like I said, some of them are slow, like network solutions you mentioned. So it is slow and it does take some time. But I think it Namecheap also, like, if you're using the free version of free DNS, the basic DNS manager, it's slow. But if you're using the advanced DNS manager, it's fast. So, but it's something that in any case, under 30 minutes should be, that's a good space to have.
Cool. All right.
One thing to make DNS faster is, one other thing is that a lot of people have a high time to life (TTL) value that they have, right? They have their A record set to like maybe 10 hours or like 16 hours, 24 hours, 4 days. So the problem with that is that if I load the website once, this TTL value tells my system to cache that value for the next, let's say, 24 hours. So even if you've changed the DNS, it's not refreshing itself because it thinks that it's valid. So another thing that sometimes we do, especially when it's an e-commerce website and I notice that the TTL value is high, I change the TTL value a few days before to 300 seconds. That's the minimum, 5 minutes. So I change it to 300 seconds. So what it does is, in the next couple of days before I migrate the website, every DNS provider in the world will know that the time to life for this record is 5 minutes. So like the longest time it can take is, for any DNS provider across the world, is 5 minutes to update itself with the new IP. So this is something you can do if you're really being technical on that side.
Yeah, I think we're going to have to implement something like the crazy optimizer tip. I actually have never done that. That's a really good idea. So maybe we'll have a little ding crazy optimizer tip as right when you're going to talk about it. So that's a great tip. So now that the DNS has changed, what are some of the final steps you're doing to complete the migration process?
I think the final steps that you have to do is make sure that the website is working, because sometimes when you do migrate things, especially if you've done a manual migration, if you've used Migrate Guru, I haven't run into issues like this with them, but there is, like, in theory they're possible. I haven't run into them. But when we used to do a manual migration, we used to have a lot of issues because each hosting provider has separate type of paths, right? Where they have, like, some people have /home/ your username, some people have /home/ some obscure number, and then the file path. And if you have any custom development done or any custom plugins done, and if they have hard-coded paths, that can become a problem, right? Because then those paths won't work. They're not valid anymore.
Yeah.
So making sure that they are changed. So I haven't had, like I said, with Migrate Group, we haven't had this issue. I think they've handled that. But if you're doing a manual migration, it's something to look at and make sure that you have all the paths changed. So the best way to do that is, if you don't know where to look, the best way to do is that you just go through your website, just run it. And if it's an e-commerce store, just place an order, see if you're getting transactional emails. So, like, for example, with us, like, if someone comes from a shared hosting environment, where PHP mail is open, they don't need any transactional mail provider. Their emails just go itself.
Mhm.
But with us, and like all managed hosting providers, we have PHP mail not running on the server to make sure that we don't get IPs don't get blacklisted. So then you need to have a transactional mail service provider to make sure your notifications go. So it's just doing a quick check, opening a few pages, see if everything looks okay. Because sometimes it's a visual check is just enough for a normal website. If you have a small website, a visual check will give you any indicators of problems. But if you have like an e-commerce store or something very customized, then it's always good to do the process, go through and place an order, place a dummy order, see if everything works, everything checks out.
Yeah, I mean, obviously forms very important contact.
And one thing again, a tip here again, is one thing that I do is, before migrating the websites, I do clear the caches and disable all caching plugins. This is something that I do because I have noticed that sometimes when you don't delete, you purge your cache and disable the cache plugins, and you move the site, because it's cached. Some of these things are cached and they don't get moved. Things get tricky there. So sometimes websites don't load unless you go in and again delete the cache. So I just do it before the migrations. I disable all caching and performance plugins and then migrate the website.
Mm-hmm. Cool, great. Well, we're at over 20 minutes now. So any last tips for people that are trying to run migrations or want to, move websites?
I think with migrations, the biggest thing is that people are nervous. Like, sometimes when you're doing a migration, you do get nervous. But I think because there's so many things that can go wrong, but I think with tools like Migrate Guru, things like that, and there's some very good guides as well on the internet, like written by different blogs, which you can follow and go through. So I think it's not as hard as it used to be. And a tip or advice would be to go for a host that gives you migrations. So if you're not technical enough, if you don't know, if you haven't done that before, if you don't know this, it's better not to do it and just have your hosting provider do it for you.
Yeah. And there are a lot of providers that will do 1 or 2 sites for free. We do all sites for free. We move them for you. One of our differentiating factors, we believe. And obviously making sure that the site's completely up and running and troubleshooting anything, even as you move different versions, if you move up in different versions in PHP or whatever it may be. So
that's a good point there as well, because sometimes that happens as well. If you're moving from a provider that was using maybe PHP 5.6 and your new provider uses PHP, let's say 7.4, the latest one, things can break.
Yeah.
So, but a visual check will tell you. If once you do a visual check, you'll know. But I think that's the main thing, knowing the environment before you do the migration. So I think that's why it's always good for a professional or hosting provider to do it, because they know both the environments, that have where because they're technical, they can look at where the site is coming from and also look at their environment. So making sure that there won't be any problems.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Today, not the most exciting stuff, not the flashy green scores that we like to achieve, but it's a very, critical step in the process is migrating sites to, one provider to another. So I think we'll wrap that up for episode 7 of the Crazy Optimizer. I'm Michael, he's Abdul. We're giving websites hope. If you have any questions or concerns or would like to talk to us about migrating websites, we're always available. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Bye.